Welcome back. It's the Big Blue Banter, New York Giants football podcast. I'm Dan Schneier, joined as always my co-host Nick Filato, who recently I saw in the comments someone said he looked a lot like Mac from Always Sunny, and now I can't unsee it. Honestly, dude, I cannot unsee it. I was thinking about that. You do look a lot like Mac from Always Sunny. You'll never look like Fat Mac.
No, I will never look like Fat Mac unless something terrible happens.
No, nothing will happen. You are never going to look like Fat Mac. I will know you for the entirety of my life that I know you. We will die as old men, as friends, and you will be the same skinny motherfucker that you've always been with zero gut.
I'll say this. I've actually heard that Mac comparison dating back to high school. So it's something that I have heard before. I don't really see it.
Whoever said that in the comments, it was very funny, but unfortunately we'll never get to see Fat Nick. And I say that unfortunately because I think it would be funny. I know he's like devastated to even hear that could even be funny. That's not funny to him. And I think even just saying that comment out loud, he probably will eat like 13 less grams of carbs today, just based on that.
Only 13?
Only 13. But we want to do a quick recap of the second practice again. Thank you to those who are at the practice. What we want to do is a little bit of stock report, stock up, stock down type of stuff, things that are interesting already from that standpoint. So the first player I think was stock up. It was stock up from day one in practice, stock up from day two in practice. Darren Waller, from both people who are following practice today, Bobby Skinner and Connor Hughes. The guy's just open all the time in the middle of the field, according to these guys. 4 catches in the early team periods. He took a breather at one point. Daniel Jones looked another way at that point to a different receiver. But early in practice, Jones was hitting a lot of Darren Waller, whose stock is way up right now, I think. And at this point, I think, Nick, we're looking at Waller. This is my expectation going into this. Like for the last month and a half, I've been drafting Waller in our CBS Sports mock draft because I feel like he's really undervalued in fantasy right now as a 6th-round pick, 7th-round pick. When meanwhile, if you look at all the tight ends across the NFL, I think outside of Travis Kelce, there's not really a case to be made for anyone that has a better chance than Waller to be the number one target getter on their specific team. Mark Andrews, maybe, but they added a lot of different pieces, and Monken's running a system where I think the ball will be spread out. Outside of Kelce, though, and Waller, I don't know too many other players who could be the number one target getter on their team. And it seems like we're starting to get to the point, Nick, here where it seems very, very likely that Waller is not only going to be the top target getter on the Giants, but could be looking at potentially like 125 targets in his first season.
Which wasn't necessarily something that I initially expected. I still thought it would be diversified, the target share, like the target pool would be spread out. And I still kind of do think that to some degree, but I think the passing attack will go through Darren Waller, not just because of these training camp practices, but if this guy can't stay healthy, which was always the point of emphasis that we were concerned about, like, is he going to stay healthy? Is he going to stay on the field now that he is north of 30 years old? If he does, we're going to see the Daniel Bellinger role on steroids plus some. It's going to be so much more from what the Giants were doing in the red zone last season with Daniel Bellinger. Now you have Darren Waller. That's a complete, we love Daniel Bellinger on this podcast. He's an acquaintance of the podcast as we talk about, but what Darren Waller offers is unique. There are really no tight ends other than maybe Kyle Pitts who have that type of athletic upside. Not even Travis Kelce has that athletic upside. And with the offensive mind of Mike Kafka and Brian Dable, with Darren Waller and the development and growth of Daniel Jones, I really think we're going to see something that we saw maybe in last time we saw was 2020, that type of Darren Waller here when he was with the Raiders here in New York now.
And speaking of Daniel Bellinger, he's another guy who made our stock up list for this podcast. Daniel Bellinger apparently catching everything in practice, just like Darren Waller. A lot of catches from Daniel Jones today in the second practice. Hasn't dropped a thing. And remember, David Syverson brought this up on the last podcast. Daniel Bellinger had one of the best catch rates we've ever seen, really, for a tight end rookie. And if you remember back to last season, he didn't drop many passes. And that was the case today at practice today. Those hands are great. And in addition to that, according to Pat Traina, who was at practice, she said he looks a little bit quicker out there. That doesn't surprise me. He converted about 9 pounds. And I know I said this in a previous podcast. People are like, no, that's not the technical term for it. I guess he didn't convert it, but he replaced about 9 pounds. He's the same weight, except he's added muscle is the best way to describe this. He's toned his body down. He looks, he's worked his ass off in the offseason. Like any other athlete would, but he takes it to another level, and he's quicker out there right now, and he's getting open easier for Daniel Jones, and he's presenting himself. And I think what's really interesting about this Bellinger situation is a lot of people assumed when they traded for Waller, it's going to take Bellinger's role will take a step back, but I'm not so sure, because if you run 12 personnel with Bellinger and Waller, it's essentially running 11 personnel out there. Darren Waller moves like a wide receiver. He's used like a wide receiver. They're motioning him to the backfield, for God's sake. They're going to use him outside on the boundary, and the slot is the big slot. Like, it's essentially 11 personnel with Waller and Bellinger on the field. And I think we're going to end up seeing a lot of Bellinger. Will his snap share be exactly as high as it was last year on a per game basis? Because he was like insanely high snap share last year. Maybe not, but I don't know if it's going to be too far off, Nick, because I feel like they have just as much of an 11 personnel look with both of them on the field. I also think, one more point on that. Actually, go ahead, and then I'll get into that.
I was just going to say, it just gives you options as an offensive play caller.
Yep.
And like we said with David Syvertson as well, you're putting the ball in the defensive coordinator's court. What personnel are you going to roll out there? And this is going to be a week-to-week phenomenon here, how the Giants handle their offensive personnel packages, because you have players, like I said on previous podcast, Paris Campbell, who can play a running back type of role. You have players like Darren Waller. Your 13 personnel package may be more athletic than some other teams' 12 personnel packages with guys like Lawrence Cager and even Daniel Bellinger, as Patty Traina said, looks a little bit faster, and he was never one to be slow in the first place. The options that Mike Kafka now has from a deployment of different personnel and how that's going to affect the rushing attack, the play action passing attack, the spread approach of the Giants offense that they employed last year, I think it's going to be something that from week one, we're going to be so excited to watch and cover. And there's going to be different iterations throughout the year. Just like last season, there were different offenses, different iterations of that offense. Now you have so many more options than you did last season.
Yeah, you're right. And I was going to make an overall like 30,000 foot viewpoint that we can discuss in a moment. But before I get to that, I did want to say, you know, thinking back, and someone brought this up to me on Twitter, shout out. Let me try to find who this was. I'll find it at some point. Napoleon blown apart, a funny name. You know, if you think back to the days of Mike Kafka working with Andy Reid in Kansas City, they went up and down that depth chart at tight end and used just about everyone you could think. There were guys who were on the field, I remember, for the Chiefs at times. I'm like, who is this? It's like the third tight end on the depth chart, the fourth tight end on the depth chart. Tight ends are a big part of this offense, a big part of what Kafka wants to do. And then you look at what Dable's done in his past with Buffalo and with New England. It's a big part. It's maybe the position they value more so than other coaches around the NFL when you look at just how deep down that depth chart Kafka went with those tight ends in Kansas City. And then last year, Lawrence Cager, Chris Myrick, they were doing the same thing, the Giants. Now they just have a better group of tight ends to work with, Bellinger and Waller. So, of course, they're going to use them even more.
The best thing that Napoleon Bonaparte, the great Napoleon Bonaparte, brought up was the fact that he turned pick 100 and I think pick 112 into Darren Waller and Daniel Bellinger. Those are two fourth-round picks that you just turned and completely revamped your tight end room. And I want to bring up one thing with Lawrence Cager, and I know I've touched on this in other podcasts, but it's important. When the Giants signed Lawrence Cager, this was somebody who was on the practice squad of the New York Jets, a former wide receiver. Right when he came over to the New York Giants, he was automatically a part of the game plan in the red zone. Remember the play? He had a touchdown where it was 12 personnel. He came across the formation, and his athletic ability, he outran, I think, Jalen Petrie to the pylon. And then we also saw a play where it was like I think it was a play action wheel or a screen, a fake screen to Saquon Barkley. And then Lawrence Cager acted like he was going to block. And then he wheeled to the back pylon, ended up going incomplete. But you saw how Mike Kafka and Brian Dable were like, we have an athletic tight end right now. Let's try to utilize it in the red zone. Lawrence Cager is a solid football player. Darren Waller is a completely different football player. You're going to see that. And again, on freaking huge amounts of steroids, like 1980s powerlifting type of steroids this season. And I'm so excited for it.
Yeah, that's a great point you brought up. Just thinking about the red zone offense design and how big of a factor the tight ends were, and how they allow that position allows Kafka and Dable to get really creative with their design. And I think that's a huge factor and a huge point, and not just the red zone offense. I think we'll see it inside in between the 20s as well this year. And to your overall point, like taking a step back, you want to look for ways to give this regime props. A lot of people are like, well, I'm not so sure yet. Yeah, they handled the Barkley situation well, et cetera, et cetera. We'll see what happens with the draft. But I mean, like you mentioned, Joe Schoen's turned it an absolute weakness. Tight end position was an absolute weakness before he got here for the Giants into an absolute strength. And all he had to do was use pick 100, which he traded Kadarius Toney to get for Darren Waller, and pick 100 for Darren Waller, and then pick 112 to get Daniel Bellinger, a tight end. Yeah, it's hard to hit on pick 112, but I mean, he did it. we already know at this point Bellinger is a hit. At worst, he's going to be a great blocker for the Giants and someone you can rely on as just a guy who never drops a pass. At best, he's going to be someone who can get open more often, who can be a bigger factor in the red zone, and who can, at some point in my mind at least, add a vertical element. I think I saw it on film last year when Bellinger was running the seam. The ball never came his way for some reason in those regards. Hopefully this year it does come his way. I think it's going to come Waller's way. We've seen it in practice already, right? Like Waller's running a lot of seam over the middle. He's running a lot of vertical stuff, and he's getting the football. But the point is, Joe Schoen turned this position. I mean, we were in such a desperate position that they signed Kyle Rudolph. Kyle freaking Rudolph, who's now out of the NFL. Dave Gettleman gave him a multi-year contract with guaranteed money. That's how bad tight end was for the Giants. Within 2 years, using nothing, using dart throw picks. In my lifetime, every pick after 75 basically has been a bust for the Giants, with the exception of Ahmad Bradshaw, Kevin Boss, like few and far in between. We just did two draft podcasts, a draft bust podcast, a draft steal podcast. I don't remember too many picks at all past 100 that were in most recent. They were all from 2008 or earlier, during the Ernie Accorsi, Jerry Reese days, and especially the Accorsi days. So just the ability to do that, I think, has changed the roster complexion big time here.
Darren Waller. The guy is an absolute giant. There was a clip on Twitter, I think put out by the Giants Take podcast, I believe it is. I want to shout those guys out. They're like young kids in their 20s or maybe even in their teens, grinding out there. Darren Waller was lined up against Zion Gilbert, who's listed at 6'1". I think he's a little bit shorter than that. But still, Darren Waller looks like Juan from Game of Thrones against Zion Gilbert. He is gigantic. This guy, like, I don't think we can underestimate how large of a human being he is with that type of athletic ability and how that will be leveraged.
Yeah, and hopefully he will. I mean, look, he even mentioned that he's done some different things within his offseason training to get himself to stay healthier for the season. As he said it best, like sometimes you can overtrain in the offseason and overtrain your muscles, and that's something he took into account this year. I'm hoping that's the magic pill that allows him to stay healthy for the season. We'll find out. I think in general, being on this team will help him as well, because he's not as relied on, in my opinion, as he was in Oakland or in Vegas. And he might be even used a little bit less from a snap share standpoint because they have Daniel Bellinger on the roster. You know, because you could easily give Darren Waller a breather, put in Daniel Bellinger and three of the Giants receivers, the deep receiver core, and be fine. Like, you're fine. Yeah. You can do different things too. You can get speed on the field, depending if you want to get Hyatt and Slayton on at the same time. So you can actually afford to give Darren Waller a bit of a break at times. That was never the case for him in Vegas.
One more thing on Daniel Bellinger too. Who was his biggest advocate in the front office? Was Brandon Brown. That addition of Brandon Brown kind of slides under the radar, right? Oh, he's like the assistant general manager. Oh, that's cool. You know, he comes from the Eagles. They're a good organization. We hate them, but they're a good organization. This guy is helping the Giants transcend the absolute tire fire that they were from a front office standpoint. Now, Joe Schoen deserves, obviously he's the head guy, deserves so much credit, but what Brandon Brown is doing and how he is influencing the Giants towards a more Philadelphia-like approach. And you know what? I am all for that. Philadelphia just represented the NFC in the Super Bowl. I get it. I freaking hate the Philadelphia Eagles, but they're a good damn football team and they're well run. The way he's influencing this team and helping Joe Schoen build this roster out is assisting the Giants and getting guys like Daniel Bellinger on day 3. And as you brought up, we went over the Bust podcast. We went over the Steal podcast more, which is more relevant. There weren't a lot of steals on day 3 in recent memory. There really weren't. So if Brandon Brown can consistently do that, and we start getting some positive contributions from players like Dane Belton and other players that were selected on day 3, Darian Beavers possibly, then you're really going to start seeing the Giants be an actual Super Bowl contender if Daniel Jones continues to develop. And that's really the crux of everything.
Yeah, you're 100% right. Another guy stock up for, I think, is Ben Bredeson. Ben Bredeson took some snaps at all 3 positions on the interior offensive line today, but did work with the first-team offense at left guard as John Michael Schmitz rotated in. Remember, John Michael Schmitz didn't work with the first team yesterday. Now he's first-team center today, and Bredeson stays in that lineup. Azudu comes out. I think it's definitely a stock-up spot for him. I think they're rewarding him, this coaching staff, for the work he's put in the offseason. And look, you know, you can look at his 2022 season with the Giants and say it wasn't that good or whatever, but you could also look at it like he was trending really well. The film was good, and then he got hurt. And we don't know the extent of that injury. That injury could have been the exact reason why he never got the playing time the rest of the season that we thought he might at one point, given the you know, what he put on film for the Giants at times. And it wasn't perfect, but it was easily the best, most consistent film outside of Andrew Thomas last year. And of course, it was a very inconsistent line, so I get that. But he's getting rewarded early. He's taking a lot of first-team reps. He's playing all 3 positions. I'm starting to think Ben Bredeson has a really good chance to beat Azudu out here, Nick, which I didn't think going into this thing. And it's not a knock on Azudu. And we love Azudu on this pod. We love his upside. He's flashed big time in the run game, especially that Jacksonville game. That's the one that stands out to me. But it's not the worst thing in the world if he comes into this season on the bench, in my opinion. If that means Bredeson's at left guard, Schmitz is at center, and they're getting more consistent pass protection from those two. Because that's my thing with Azudu. Azudu will give the Giants upside in the run game, in space, Barkley in space, Hyatt coming on end arounds, things like that. But overall, what I really want is pass protection for Daniel Jones, because that's how I get the passing game that we need to be the Super Bowl contender. It's all through the pass protection. And so if Bredeson's a more consistent option in pass pro, I don't mind him starting week 1. I like it almost.
You would prefer consistency over upside on the offensive line, because the offensive line can kill you. One weak link can kill you. And we saw that at times last year with Josh Azudu. And I'm not saying that Josh Azudu didn't take steps forward in his development throughout the offseason. He very well might have. That has to play out in training camp, and we have to see that. In terms of Ben Bredeson, he was pretty damn consistent last year. Don't think he gave up any sacks. He pressure wise, it wasn't really something that was an indictment on his play. Like, he wasn't giving up that many pressures. Whereas Josh Azudu felt like every time, and I think Cy brought this up, a defensive lineman got to his secondary move, put him on his back a little bit, made him react. He struggled, and then he gave up the pressure. Whereas Ben Bredeson was much more consistent. Even if Josh Azudu was your long-term plan, and say Ben Bredeson is his last year under contract, you don't have a long-term plan for him. Start Ben Bredeson and have Ben Bredeson lose that job. Have Josh Azudu earn that job. But you know what? I'm also just completely fine with what's going on in training camp. And we're just talking about this right now. But what's going on in training camp is they're just battling it out. Whoever wins that left guard spot wins that left guard spot. And Bredeson, they trust him so much that he's actually battling for center as well. Now, I think that battle is a battle, quote unquote. Right. John Michael Schmitz will end up starting eventually, but still you need Ben Bredeson to be cross-trained at that position, because Bredeson's going to make the roster. As we said yesterday, JC Hassenauer more than likely won't.
Yeah, I mean, no offense to him, it's just hard to make the roster as at that point you're a swing center. Another guy who's stock up a little bit from today, I thought, Colin Johnson had himself a nice practice, and Colin Johnson's someone we forget a lot because there's just 17,000 receivers on the roster right now, which is a great problem to have. I mean, it just, again, remember how bad things were last year with David Sills starting a lot of snaps. And I hate to say it, because Sills is also having himself a good camp, quote unquote. It's just like, unfortunately, that doesn't win you NFL games, having a guy like that out there. But Colin Johnson, in my opinion, can potentially win you NFL games. We forget about him, but he's made this incredibly fast recovery from the Achilles, and he offers something, in my opinion, different than the entire receiver core outside of Darren Waller. He's the closest thing to Waller they have. He's a less fast version, in my mind, almost of Darren Waller, but it's that same length and smoothness to his game that he had. He always had it, even when he was first acquired during the Judge Garrett era, and he played immediately. I thought he always did a really good job of working back to the quarterback and really getting in and out of his breaks smoothly for someone who's 6'6". And that was kind of his calling card for me. And you saw it last summer when he really moved up the depth chart in training camp. Maybe he can do it again, Nick. Like, it's not going to completely surprise me if he does, because he did it last summer. Then he got hurt. Now he's back. He knows the system already. I'm intrigued to see if Colin Johnson can move his way up this depth chart. And it's going to make things so interesting in the wide receiver core, because there's just so many options right now.
He was going to have a huge role last year if he didn't tear his Achilles. Yep. He beat Deontay Banks today on a fade pass in the red zone that ended up going for a touchdown. Nice concentration. And he beat Tay Banks pretty cleanly too. Mainly because Banks just missed his press, gave up the outside release. But a reason why he missed the press was because Colin Johnson's release really influenced Banks to shade to the inside just a little bit more than he probably should have when he threw that jam. And you could see he throws the jam. Colin Johnson just dips the shoulder and gets right around to the outside. Creates about a yard of separation in a very tight, confined part of the field to make that catch. Nice throw over the top. I wouldn't be shocked if Colin Johnson makes this team. I mean, injuries are going to happen throughout training camp. There's going to be opportunity that has to be seized. I think Bryce Ford-Wheaton is his main competition to making the team. I think it's going to come down to Colin Johnson and Bryce Ford-Wheaton. And I know Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen, they'll say like, oh, this is, meritocracy. Whoever wins this battle in training camp will make the roster. But if they had their druthers, in my opinion, they would probably choose Bryce Ford-Wheaton. They spent $200,000+ on him in signing bonus, and he's a young kid that they can get under a cheap contract for quite a while, whereas Colin Johnson recovering from a torn Achilles. Speaking of BFW, I don't know if you saw that play that Trey Hawkins III had against him.
The interception,
the intercept. That was great. A great patient, savvy play by Trey Hawkins III on inside leverage to allow Bryce Ford-Wheaton to get too deep into the end zone, and then once the depth of Bryce Ford Wheaton's route brought him to basically the end line. Trey Hawkins III just shaded to the inside, waited for Bryce Ford Wheaton to enter his dig, and then he just turned his head around and he was right in position. Very, very good play by a 6th-round pick out of Old Dominion.
I'm very excited about look, I'm not very excited about it. You know my general stance on this, Nick.
Yeah.
Any pick past 200, you need to really start to prove yourself to me before I get too excited, because I've been burned way too many times by those picks. But it does feel like he has a different profile than Corey Ballantyne did coming out. Ballantyne to me was more of a pick less of an upside traits-based pick. This is more of a traits-based pick, Hawkins, and I feel like there's a chance maybe that could help him translate at least earlier to the NFL.
I really think so too. I mean, look at Jason Pinnock is somewhat of a traits-based type of safety. I think Trey Hawkins is that same type of cornerback. And the one thing that I really love and respected about Trey Hawkins III's tape at Old Dominion was how physical he was. This guy was a dog. You hear that thrown around a lot, but if you turn on his tape, and I get he's playing at the Old Dominion level, turn on his tape against Virginia. The guy is spearing through these ACC offensive wide receivers and these tight ends. The guy played with reckless abandon, and I love that type of mentality. I know Wink Martindale loves that type of mentality as well. He's going to have a place on this roster, and by mid-season, if he's healthy and everything is clicking and he's starting to develop, I wouldn't be shocked to see him out on the football field in these quarter type of personnel packages.
And it would be really interesting to see. Another stock up, I thought, from today that was really interesting. We're going to flip it now to the other side of the ball. Cordell Flott, and this is according to Bobby Skinner, had a really good practice working with the first team defense, and more importantly, according to Bobby, he had a really good practice with the press jam, and that's something that we need to see with within Wink Martindale's system. You already made mention of it. Deonte Banks is going to be a work in progress in that regard. They're going to have to really shore up his technique to get him going. He obviously didn't have a great practice today. Didn't really have a great practice in his first practice. And we've talked about this in the past. Like Deonte Banks, there's a chance that it doesn't click right away. This is a very hard position to transition to the NFL to cornerback. And that won't impact our feelings long term, but it might impact what he can do early on. But Cordell Flott seems to be the opposite. It seems like a guy who really might be taking that jump within the second year. I'm very excited about Flott. Dating back, Nick, Flott was one of my favorite picks in that class. And I know a lot of people weren't high on him, but I just love the traits I saw. And I love that click and close ability and that length. And it's not even like crazy length on paper. It's just length you see on tape type of thing. It's the way he closes. And if he's getting that jam down, Nick, I think he has a really good shot to just shoot up this depth chart to the point where he's a locked-in starter for week one, whether it's in the slot or on the outside.
He can make Darnay Holmes more expendable, or he could just offer Wink Martindale more options. That's what this is all about. Just give your coordinators and your coaches more options. So if Darnay Holmes is struggling, then you can put Cordell Flott there. If Deonte Banks is struggling, now you have Cordell Flott who can also play on the outside. He's one of those pieces in terms of options, as well as Aaron Robinson, who is another player, if he does get healthy, who can maybe provide options for Wink Martindale in a variety of different roles.
Yeah, you nailed it. And I'm excited to see his development. I'm really that's the one so far that's really stood out to me so far. What we've read about Flott in the slot and just playing with that first team defense, getting that press jam down. For us,
I have one other player I want to mention. Cole Beasley. And I know we talked about him a little bit yesterday, but Brian Dable said, I think it might have been after practice, or maybe it was before, actually, it was before, that Cole Beasley is smart and a scrappy veteran. And I only bring this up because I saw some clips of him. There was one clip against Darnay Holmes where Cole Beasley tried to avoid contact against Holmes, which was in a press situation, and he stumbles. It's not a great clip of Cole Beasley, but the thing that I was impressed by was what happened after that. Because after Cole Beasley stumbled and it looked sloppy, he released to the outside, turned his shoulders and his head towards the quarterback, and then put his outside foot in the ground and was just heading back inside. And I was like, how the hell does he move that quickly at 34 years old? Like, the guy's short area quickness is still damn exceptional from the videos that I have seen.
He's an exceptional athlete. People don't look at him as an exceptional athlete because
for reasons,
but whatever. And 40 times not great. But don't you guys remember? Maybe you guys don't remember this. I'm not sure if you saw this at any point, Nick. But during his tenure with the Cowboys, I remember a video surfacing of him doing a 360 dunk at, like, what is he, 5 foot what?
He's like 5'9", maybe.
He's like 5'9". And he did a 360 dunk. If you can do a 360 dunk at 5'9", let me assure you that you're an athletic human being. And not only are you an athletic human being, you're one of the most athletic human beings. Because I'm 5'8", and I don't even think I could reach the net right now if I tried to dunk a basketball, okay?
I'll say one thing, too. I think it was 2 years ago when the NFL did their top 100 or whatever. Stephon Diggs was talking about Cole Beasley, and he was like, Cole Beasley is easily the most difficult cover on the Bills. It's like he's better than me at uncovering. Like they were ushering praise on this guy. And I know that was 2 years ago, but still just from the little clips, and maybe attrition's going to take in and Cole Beasley, he can't carry this over because, the day in, day out work of the NFL. But I wouldn't be shocked, man. I mean, my stock has risen with Cole Beasley over the last couple of days. And that's not something I thought I would
went from he wasn't even on the roster to now he's probably, there's a good chance he's going to make the roster to maybe he's going to make an impact like on offense. And you're right, Nick, because you said it best a day ago or 2 days ago, whenever you said this. This coaching staff is looking for one thing more than anything. And so is Joe Schoen, because he made it clear when he confirmed this in a press conference. If it was a pre-draft presser or something, whatever he said it. They want early separation from these receivers. They want to create layup throws for the quarterback. Every offense should be looking to do that. Kyle Shanahan does it too. He does it in a different way with the play action and the deep crossers. And honestly, it's maybe a better way but not a better way. It's his run game is so sound that he's like those. The way he gets those receivers open creates a lot of yak opportunity more than our system will. Let's be honest about that. But it's because they have a run game that's different. And it's based off the run game. But it's the same idea. It's create early separation for these receivers and for these quarterbacks. So you could see what Shanahan did during his days. A lot of what Jimmy G did was just hit your back foot, throw the ball. That's it. That's a lot of what Jones did last year when he was successful too. And it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. Layup throws are good. We want that. We want completions. And sometimes you can turn those into yak. Maybe Beasley's not the best yak guy on this roster. Sure, I get that. But if he's giving Jones a solution, that's big important to me, because Jones didn't have a lot of solutions with the Jason Garrett era. He just didn't. There was not many solutions out there. A lot of it was a stick route that breaks back to the quarterback. The DB's on your ass. I guess throw the football, but it's probably getting tipped up into the air and maybe intercepted. Now there's solutions within his offense. Beasley might be a solution maker for them. And you're right. His stock needs to be up as well. All right. That's all we have for today on the Big Blue Banter podcast. This is stock up from early training camp. Keep it locked and loaded. More content to come. Have a great rest of your week, and we will talk to you soon.